The church bells rang across the city, their deep echoes carrying through the crisp morning air. Inside the grand cathedral, every pew was filled, and the polished marble floor gleamed under the golden light pouring in from tall stained glass windows. Guests whispered excitedly, their voices rising and falling in waves, all of them eager to witness the union between Daniel and the daughter of one of the wealthiest businessmen in town. To everyone present, it was a fairy tale come to life. A young man marrying into privilege, a life of comfort and prestige finally within his grasp. Daniel stood at the altar, his suit immaculately tailored, his tie perfectly knotted. He looked every bit the groom in a picture-perfect ceremony. But beneath the surface, his heart raced not from joy but from the weight of secrets he carried deep inside. He could feel his palms sweating, despite the coolness of the sanctuary. He shifted his stance slightly, trying to steady his breathing as his eyes darted toward the heavy doors at the back. In a few moments, they would open, and his bride would appear, radiant and smiling, ready to begin a future with him. On the outside, Daniel seemed calm, a man stepping into his destiny. But inside, shadows of his past flickered relentlessly. He remembered nights spent on a cold bench in the city park, wrapping his thin jacket tighter around him as hunger gnawed at his stomach. He remembered walking the streets with his head down, ashamed of the empty pockets that left him unable to buy even the simplest meal. He had come from nothing, clawing his way up through odd jobs, sleepless nights, and promises to himself that one day he would escape. To the world, this marriage was proof that he had succeeded. To Daniel, it felt like a fragile mask hiding the truth of where he had once been. The ceremony went on, sacred words spoken, vows exchanged, and rings slipped onto trembling fingers. Applause filled the cathedral, thunderous and joyful, echoing up to the arched ceiling. Daniel forced a smile, though his heart was pounding in a way that felt almost painful. They walked down the aisle together, his bride's delicate hand in his, and as they stepped outside, sunlight poured over them. Guests tossed rose petals into the air, laughter ringing out, cameras flashing to capture the perfect moment. Then, through the sea of faces and the blur of petals, Daniel noticed a small figure moving slowly toward him. At first, he thought it was just another well-wisher, someone bringing flowers as a gift. But as the figure drew closer, Daniel's breath caught. It was an elderly woman, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, her steps careful and deliberate as she approached. Her clothes were simple, faded with time, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a single flower. In the midst of all the grand bouquets and expensive arrangements, she held only one yellow rose. Its petals were slightly frayed at the edges, its stem wrapped in plain paper. She extended it toward Daniel with a small, knowing smile, and the world seemed to stop. The laughter, the music, the chatter, all of it faded into silence as Daniel's eyes locked onto hers. Recognition hit him like a wave. He knew this woman. He remembered her face, though it had aged with the years. Long ago, when he had been nothing more than a hungry, lost young man wandering the streets, she had been there. A florist with a small cart by the corner, selling flowers to passers-by. He had stood by once, staring at the roses, unable to afford even the cheapest bloom. She had noticed him, and instead of shooing him away as others often did, she had reached for a yellow rosé. She had placed it in his hand with a gentle smile and said words he never forgot, "Better days will come. Don't give up, son." At the time, Daniel had clutched that rose like it was the most precious treasure in the world. It wasn't just a flower, it was hope, given freely when he had nothing. That single act of kindness had carried him through one of his darkest nights, reminding him that even strangers could show compassion. And now, here she was again, at the very moment when Daniel was stepping into the life he had once dreamed of. His chest tightened, his eyes stung, and for a moment he thought he might collapse under the weight of it all. She hadn't brought him a lavish bouquet or a congratulatory card. She had brought him the same gift she had once given before, a single yellow rose, bright and fragile, a reminder of where he came from and the humanity that had lifted him. Daniel froze, his hand hovering as if afraid to take it. His bride glanced at him, puzzled by his sudden stillness. The guests, noticing the pause, quieted, curious about the old florist and her simple offering. But Daniel was lost in memory, in gratitude, in the raw collision of past and present. The grand cathedral, the wealthy guests, the life of luxury awaiting him, all of it felt distant compared to the soft gaze of the woman who had once given him hope when he had none. As he reached out, his fingers brushed the stem, and his heart swelled with unspoken emotion. He knew this was not coincidence. It was life circling back, reminding him of the truth he had nearly buried beneath polished shoes and designer suits. The yellow rose trembled between them, not just a flower, but a bridge between the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. The moment Daniel's fingers closed around the stem of the yellow rose, it was as though the earth shifted beneath his feet. The sound of clapping hands and cheerful chatter dimmed into a hollow hum, like waves crashing far away. He stood frozen in time, staring into the kind eyes of the old florist. In her quiet gaze was recognition, not of the man he had become, but of the boy he once was. She remembered him, though he had been just another face among countless strangers she had met in her long years of selling flowers. And yet, for Daniel, she was unforgettable. She was the first person who had seen him when he was invisible to the world. His throat tightened, and he felt the sting of tears pressing against his eyes. He had worked so hard to bury the past, to push it so deep beneath layers of success and ambition that no one would ever guess what he had endured. But with that simple gesture, the florist had brought it all rushing back, raw and unfiltered. The hunger, the loneliness, the shame of standing on street corners hoping someone would drop spare change, it was all there, woven into the fragile petals of that rose. His bride tugged gently at his hand, her voice soft but laced with concern. "Daniel, are you all right?" Her question broke through the haze, pulling him back into the present. He turned to her, his chest heavy with the weight of a truth he had never dared to speak aloud. She had fallen in love with the man she thought he was, confident, composed, untouchable. But could she love the boy who had once been broken, lost, and desperate? The thought terrified him. The florist's wrinkled face softened as if she could hear the silent war raging inside him. She gave a faint nod, her lips curling into the same gentle smile she had given him years ago when she'd first handed him a rosé. "Remember who you are," her eyes seemed to say. "Don't be afraid." Daniel swallowed hard, his decision forming like a flame in the darkness. He couldn't keep hiding. Not today. Not in front of the woman who had promised to spend her life with him. He turned toward his bride, his voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "There's something I need to tell you." The crowd shifted uneasily, the joyful atmosphere thinning into tense silence. All eyes were on him now, the groom who had stopped the perfect wedding procession to bare his soul. His bride's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't let go of his hand. Instead, she squeezed it, her touch warm and reassuring, urging him to continue. Daniel took a deep breath, clutching the yellow rose as if it were an anchor. "Everyone here sees me as lucky, as the man who married into a life of wealth and comfort. But the truth is, I haven't always been the man you see standing here today. I came from nothing. I was homeless. There were nights I had no bed, no food, no hope. I thought I would never escape it." His voice cracked, and he paused, the weight of his confession sinking into the hushed silence of the crowd. Gasps rippled through the guests, whispers rising in the pews. But Daniel pressed on. He held up the rose for all to see. "When I had nothing, this woman, this florist, gave me a yellow rosé. She didn't know me, she didn't owe me anything. But she gave me kindness when the world had given me nothing. And I held on to that kindness. It reminded me that better days could come, even when I couldn't see them yet." His bride's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she listened. Daniel's chest ached as he spoke the words he had carried like a secret burden for years. "I wanted to keep my past hidden, to pretend it didn't exist. But standing here today, holding this rose again, I realize I can't build a life with lies. You deserve the truth, and I need you to know who I really am." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Daniel feared rejection, the look of disappointment he had seen so many times in the past when people discovered where he had come from. But then, to his astonishment, his bride reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing away the tear that had slipped down his cheek. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, "I didn't fall in love with your past or your future. I fell in love with you, the man who stands here, who has walked through darkness and still has the heart to love. That makes you stronger than anyone I know." The tension in his chest broke, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief and gratitude. He pulled her into his arms, the crowd erupting into applause that felt different this time. It wasn't for the luxury or the spectacle. It was for the honesty, the courage, the love that had just been laid bare before them all. The florist, standing quietly with her empty hand, watched with a small, proud smile. She had not come for recognition or thanks. She had come to remind him of the truth, that no act of kindness is ever wasted. Daniel stepped toward her, still holding his bride's hand, and pressed the rose to his chest. "You saved me once," he said softly. "And today, you reminded me of who I am. I'll never forget it." She shook her head gently, her eyes glistening. "No, son, you saved yourself. I just gave you a flower." But Daniel knew better. That flower had been more than petals and a stem. It had been hope, the seed of resilience that had carried him through. He looked at the guests, at his new wife, and back at the florist, and he understood something he never had before. Wealth, status, appearances, none of it truly mattered. What mattered was love, kindness, and the courage to be honest about who we are. The yellow rose had come full circle, now not just a symbol of survival, but of truth, compassion, and the extraordinary power of a single act of generosity. As the cheers rose around them, Daniel held his bride's hand tighter, his heart no longer weighed down by shame. For the first time, he felt truly free.